We're going to start with President Trump's war on mail-in voting. It is continuing to escalate, and the president is threatening to withhold funding to the Postal Service that could help them deal with what is expected to be an influx of mail-in ballots because of the coronavirus pandemic. He's continued to claim that mail-in voting leads to widespread fraud and rigged elections without presenting any evidence. Security analysts argue that election-related crimes definitely exist, but voting fraud is rare in the United States. Several states are opting for mail-in voting this fall as the coronavirus pandemic grips much of the country. Democrats have been pushing for the Postal Service to receive more funding in the latest relief package so workers can handle the influx of mail-in ballots. However, President Trump says that he opposes that move, sparking major outrage among voting rights advocates. And so now, we do. We want to bring in Caitlin Huey-Burns to talk a little bit more about this controversy. Caitlin, I'm glad you're here. So Caitlin, as I understand it, there are a lot of factors that will most likely lead to many people voting by mail. It's not just that people are concerned about their health and they don't want to, expose themselves to the coronavirus, but also those who typically would be running a lot of these polling places are also concerned about exposing themselves to the coronavirus, and it's increasingly becoming harder and harder for people to get for organizers to get volunteers who are willing to do that. So it's a big problem, and it needs to be handled, and it can be handled. You've done a lot of reporting on this issue. For me, I'm a little I don't quite understand why the president has taken aim at mail-in ballots. And I'll tell you why. When I think of just one group of voters, seniors, who are most susceptible to the virus and also more likely to vote for Trump. They did in 2016. So to me, you would think that he would be encouraging mail-in ballots because, there's a greater chance that at least some of the people that voted for him will be able to vote again. What's your take on why he's taking this stance?
Good morning, Anna Marie. That is such a great point and a critical one, and one that election officials from both parties have brought up to us in our reporting. I've also talked to Republicans who say that there should be a strategy around mail-in voting because of the reasons that you just described. If we could just take a step back really quickly, the reason that we're talking about mail-in voting is because we're in the middle of a pandemic. People want an option to vote in some way, if not in person. So we're not talking about a universal vote by mail system. All of our elections are conducted at the local level. This is simply providing an option for people who don't feel comfortable to go to the polls. And then you bring up a really critical point, and this is something that we should really hammer home over the next several weeks, is that a lot of people who work the polls, who see it as their patriotic duty to do so, tend to be older and thus more susceptible to coronavirus. So we saw in the primaries over the past few months, the primaries that occurred during the pandemic, that lots of poll workers didn't feel comfortable doing that job. And so you saw lots of poll locations closed. That means that there were fewer locations to actually vote in person, and that means there are longer lines to be able to cast your ballot. So you had people in Georgia, for example, waiting in line for hours and hours and hours. And that is a huge barrier to people who want to vote, especially for those who can't take off work, who, the idea of standing in line for a long time could be a big impediment to voting. So there are all sorts of issues here. And election officials that we've been talking to from both parties say that there needs to be an option to give people as an alternative. And so the president, by disparaging mail-in voting, could potentially be leaving some votes for himself on the table. Florida is a good example that shows that lots of people do vote absentee. It's a popular program, especially among seniors, and the president won Florida last time around.
A great point. So we're actually going to dig in a little deeper into this issue of mail-in ballots and the funding of the U.S. Postal Service later on in the show. So I want people to stick around for that conversation because I have other topics that I need to touch on with you before I got to let you go. The Democratic National Convention, it kicks off next week. It's going to be virtual, completely different. What are you going to be looking out for? I understand there's a little bit of controversy when it comes to the people who will be speaking.
That's right. Well, gone are those big crowds, lots of delegates on the floor. You're not going to see the conventional type of convention this time around. It's all going to be virtual. We know that former Vice President Joe Biden and his new running mate Kamala Harris will deliver speeches in person in Delaware next week. Those will be taped or those will be virtual. What is interesting to see is the lineup. We've seen the most diverse and biggest Democratic primary in party history, and so you're going to see lots of those former rivals of Joe Biden get speaking slots. There's also some controversy, though, about whether some newer, more progressive voices in the party are going to be heard. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez among them. There has been some criticism that she has not given ample time. I think the slot is only about a minute or so. So you're going to hear some pushback to that. The goal of the party, however, is to present a united front, and it's also trying to make an affirmative case for this ticket. Remember, in polling, we've seen that most Biden supporters are supporting him as a vehicle against Donald Trump. Well, the ticket really wants to make an affirmative case for themselves, and so you'll see them try to do that next week in their virtual convention.
That should be really interesting because we have heard a lot of talk about, a vote against the current administration. But increasingly, there are more and more voices that are, demanding that the Democrats do more than that, that's not enough to pull the party together and also to elicit passion from voters to make them want to go out and vote or take the extra steps to ask for a mail-in ballot or whatever it takes. So it should be very, very interesting to watch. Caitlin Huey-Burns, thank you very much.
Thank you.